Hello, AP Psychers. We're going to take a look at mood disorders and the DSM V diagnostic criteria for these. These are not all the mood disorders, but they're the ones that we are going to focus on. Our goal in AP Psych is to be able to tell the difference between these and to identify broad generalizations about these disorders. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the DSM V to understand what the disorders look like. But then more importantly, you're going to watch some videos where you hear from people that live with and overcome these disorders. You're going to hear from their own voices about that, which I think is really more important. So the four that we're going to focus on are major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, which is kind of like major depressive disorder light. We're going to look at bipolar I and then bipolar II, which is again like bipolar I light. So you've got the major one here, a little bit less severe, still definitely difficult to live with. Bipolar I, the major one here, and then bipolar II, a little bit less severe. So what I've done is I've color coded the DSM V, which you guys have the handouts for. And this is how, if I were a student, I would go ahead and color code this for myself so I can use these to diagnose the case studies that we're getting into tomorrow. So take a look at my first highlight here. It's 5 or more of the symptoms in that 1 to 9 list. So 5 or more of these have to be present for how long? During a 2-week period. It has to be a change from normal functioning. And they have to have at least 1 or 2, which is why I had 1 and 2 kind of highlighted here in yellow. So they have to have 1 or 2. And then they have to, from this whole list of 9, have to have 5 more. They can have 1 and 2 and then 3 from here, or they can have number 1 and then they have to have 4. I've also highlighted, and this is what I would put in my notes for major depressive disorder. So it's a 2-week period at least. It can be longer than that. Depressed mood or a loss of interest or pleasure. So here, not even, you can give someone their favorite food and it doesn't really taste good. So it has to be 1 or 2, it can be both. And then you have a whole list of categories of what it might look like. So it could be weight loss or weight gain. Now notice how specific the DSM-5 is. This is a change of more than 5% of body weight in a month. Don't forget the DSM-5 is setting down categories for how things can be diagnosed. So creating these operational definitions are really important. You have insomnia, so not being able to sleep or oversleeping nearly every day. Psychomotor agitation is kind of uncontrollable movements and restlessness that someone might experience. So you have fatigue, you have feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt, you have a difficulty being able to concentrate or make decisions, and then you might have recurrent thoughts of death or suicide ideation. And these things together, 5 of them, 2 from the yellow, have to be present for more than 2 weeks. The DSM-5 also has things at the end, which I didn't include. They talk about not being able to, and you have it in your handout, it's not attributable to drug or alcohol use. It's not better explained by a medical condition, and there's some more qualifiers. But if you're going to, in your notes, highlight the major key things about major depressive disorder, it is that it is a 2-week, it's probably depressed mood, loss of interest or pleasure in activities, and then it's these things down here. And again, you only need 5 of those. How is this different than persistent depressive disorder? Now notice here we've got a depressed mood for most of the day. Has to last for 2 years, but you only need 2 or more of the following. So this one is longer, but it's not as low, it's not as severe. And then you have very similar things to that list that we had in the past one. During that 2-year period, only 1 for children or adolescents. The individual has never been without symptoms in criteria A, right here, and B, for more than 2 months at a time. So it's this consistent low mood or poor appetite. No, so it's a low mood. We have to have that. And then 2 or more of the following. So it'll be a low mood, poor appetite, insomnia for 2 years. And then that would trigger possible diagnosis for persistent depressive disorder. Notice here D, criteria for a major depressive disorder may be continuously present for 2 years. So just Just the length is not where you want to look at. If it's lower, if it hits the diagnostic criteria for a major depressive disorder, that diagnosis would be made. This one is not as low, but it is long. And so because of its length, it gets a diagnostic criteria. Now let's shift over to bipolar disorder, and I think this is a really helpful chart for us. We just talked about all these depressive episodes, right? So that's what triggers major depressive disorder or persistent depressive disorder diagnosis is a low mood. But we have normal mood, right? And then we also have high moods, we call manic and hypomanic episodes. And what we want to take a look at next is what a manic episode is and what a hypomanic episode is, because these are going to be used for a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So let's take a look. In general, a manic episode is going to be very severe. So here we see this person has broken a window here. This person is just painting on a window. Hypomanic episode is not as severe, both very difficult to deal with. A manic episode is going to cause a diagnosis of bipolar I, so the more severe, and a hypomanic episode is going to cause a diagnosis as bipolar II. Again, both very difficult, but manic episodes creating a diagnosis of bipolar I and being more severe. Now notice, you might think that bipolar always has manic and depressive episodes, and yes, it usually does. But the diagnosis you're going to see is going to hinge on whether they have a manic episode or a hypomanic. So let's get into what these are. So a manic episode, by definition here, is an abnormally elevated, expansive, big, or irritable mood with lots of goal-directed activity, trying to get things done, lots of different projects started, going to do this, going to do that. For how long a week? Or if any hospitalization is necessary. Remember, I said the hypomanic episodes or the manic episodes are very bad. Now, during this period of mood disturbance, this elevated, huge mood with lots of goal-directed activity, you're going to have 3 or more of the following symptoms. So huge self-esteem or grandiosity, I can get almost anything done. Decreased need for sleep, super talkative, flights of ideas, got lots of things, gonna do lots of things. Distractibility easily draws attention away. This, like I said, goal-directed activity, it could be socially, at work, or sexually. Again, there's that psychomotor agitation, very fidgety. And then this excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. So unrestrained buying sprees, sexual indiscretions, foolish business investments. You only need three or more in this green list, okay? And now notice it is sufficiently severe to cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning or to necessitate hospitalization. So this is a biggie. This is going to cause an impairment in functioning, both socially or occupationally in their jobs, or even require hospitalization. So it's going to be a 1 week period of 3 or more of the following, in addition to elevated mood and goal-directed activity. Now, hypomanic, watch this. We're already going down to 4 days, okay? It's not severe, okay? You're not going to see a hospitalization. So it's already lower. And you guys see where we have 3 or more here. So it's the same list. It's the same list. It's not as long, and it doesn't require doesn't cause a marked impairment in social occupational functioning or to necessitate hospitalization. So it is very similar, but it is not as severe. It is not as severe. Okay. So how does this play out in bipolar I and II? Very easily. If at any point in time a person has a diagnosable manic episode, it's bipolar I. Might they also, and do they oftentimes also have a depressive episode at another point? Yes, absolutely. But at any point in time, there's a diagnosis of a manic episode. It is a bipolar I disorder. At any point in time where there is a diagnosis of a hypomanic episode, it is a bipolar II diagnosis. If there has ever been a diagnosis of a manic episode, it bumps up to bipolar I. So if you take a look at our chart here, a patient that has a depressive episode, then a manic episode, would get a bipolar I diagnosis. A patient that has a hypomanic episode followed by a depressive episode, bipolar II. A patient who just has a manic episode, bipolar I. A patient who just has a hypomanic episode, bipolar II. A patient who does all of this, depressive, manic, up and down, depressive, hypomanic, bipolar I, because at some point in time there was a history of a manic episode. I hope this overview helps you out and you can use it to diagnose our first case study. Take care, AP Psychers.